women of power. And what I wanted to start with here is the ambivalence felt by religious leaders, and that means male religious leaders, about powerful women. Male religious leaders can tolerate men being in power and conflict between men for leadership, but not with women. One theory is that when you have a woman in power, it reminds people of when they were very small children, at the mercy of their mother. So I'm starting with the Quran. What is the evidence for the relative freedom of women before Islam? Khadija, the first wife of the Prophet, was a wealthy trader. This was an independent woman who was autonomous, who had her own wealth. Women were present on the battlefield. At the Battle of Uhud, they were not cloistered within the house. That Aisha and other women such as Salma led troops into battle, which is more than just being on the battlefield. At the same time, there's a lot of evidence for patriarchal social relations. Polygamy was common. The marriage of Aisha was arranged while she was still a child and she was married off. There was this two-tier system. Proper women, upper-class women were veiled, and concubines were not veiled. Umar introduced regulations suppressing women's participation in society. He segregated the prayers. He introduced stoning for adultery, and he appointed a male imam to serve the women. Nevertheless, there are ways in which Islam is a liberating religion for women. The veiling of women actually raised the status of all women. No longer do you have the upper class and the lower class. All Muslim women were to be veiled. Daughters were guaranteed an inheritance. It was half that of a son, but it was a guaranteed. In the Quranic story of Adam and Eve, Eve is not created to serve Adam, and Eve is not blamed for the fall. Now I want to go back to the book of Judith to explore this ambivalence again. The book of Judith is included in the Roman Catholic Bible and in the Eastern Orthodox Christian Old Testaments, but it's not included in the Hebrew Bible or in the Protestant Bible. So right there you can see the ambivalence about the whole story of Judith. Are we going to accept this story or are we not going to accept this story? It's not truly historical. In the book of Judith, Nebuchadnezzar is said to be the king of Babylon, which is historically inaccurate, and Nebuchadnezzar's attempt to conquer Israel is foiled, whereas in reality it succeeded. So, out with your clickers. What is the moral of the story of Judith? All right? Okay, so strong on the last answer. So here's one of the most famous paintings. So this is Judith beheading Holofernes by Caravaggio in 1598. Take a good look at this. What is the message, this painted version of the story of Judith and Holofernes? Aha! Okay. You get my point. The meaning shifts, the ambivalence about women is clearly expressed. Okay, let's go to the next painting. Just a little bit later, by Artemisia Gentileschi, who was a woman. It was a woman who painted that, not a man. Look at this painting and think about it in terms of what is the message of this painting. Once again. Okay. Okay. Now here's another picture. And think about what would be the theme of this version of the story of Judith and Holofernes. Remember that, of course, Judith claims, says over and over again, that the message of the story is that God chose the hand of a lowly woman to carry out his will. And that message has completely disappeared by the time we get to the 20th century. Okay, Joan of Arc, another holy woman of power. At the age of 12, she heard voices, and she later said that St. Michael and St. Catherine and St. Margaret told her to drive the English out of France, and she gains permission to travel with the army and to wear the garb of a knight. Okay, so she's actually given permission. She was condemned to death as a heretic, a sorceress, and an adulteress, and was burned at the stake in 1431 when she was 19. 30 years after her death, they declared Joan of Arc an innocent martyr. So here's a 15th century image of Joan. I want to show you how the story of Joan of Arc is used and how essentially the message keeps changing. So this is a painting by Ingres, but this was painted in 1854. just after the Revolution of 1848 by Louis Bonaparte. It's not about Joan of Arc, it's about the emperor. Joan stands for France, and she stands for the God-chosen emperor of France. In 1871, German forces surrounded Paris and put Paris under siege. And so here we have a painting which goes back to the Voices, where this time the message is expel the foreigners from France. God only plays the role of authorizing the French nation and nationalism, essentially. When you look for images of Joan of Arc, you are flooded with images that come from World War I. She was used as a symbol for France, again, under siege by foreigners. Here's a World War I soldier on a war poster. And here is a French stamp that was put out at the time with Joan of Arc. Here's a poster in which Joan confronts the Kaiser, no less. And even in the United States, so it's not just a French icon, it's an icon that has its appeal right here. So the ankle bracelet comes from Hinduism. Well, the heroine is Kanaki, and she represents the perfect wife. And her husband, Kovalan, courts the courtesan dancer Madhavi until he's wasted all of his money and left with nothing. And then he goes back to his wife, and all she has are these beautiful gold ankle bracelets that are hollow and have jewels inside of them. Kovalan goes into the city, and he tries to sell one of the ankle bracelets, but he has the bad luck to choose a jeweler who has in fact stolen a similar anklet bracelet that belonged to the queen. And so he accuses Kovalan of being the thief, and he's killed. He's executed as a thief. When Kanaki finds out, she goes into town and she confronts the king and shows him the matching ankle bracelet. Inside the queen's bracelet were pearls. So it's clear that the king acted unjustly. In Hinduism, the word for justice and the concept of justice comes from duty. And the duty of each person is distinct and different. If you are a wife, you have a certain duty to your husband. And a wife's duty to her husband does not depend on how the husband behaves. This is a very different conception of justice. Kanaki represents divine justice, and in her wrath she destroys the king and the kingdom. She tears off her left breast and she throws it on the ground, and it sets the whole city on fire. Beware the wrath of a woman. Beware the anger of a woman. There are people who have argued that if we just had goddesses, we wouldn't have any trouble. We wouldn't have a problem. But if you look at the religion that has powerful goddesses, that is Hinduism, you find out it does not help women very much. In Hinduism, there are powerful goddesses. They're an expression of, quote, unrestrained female hostility, power, and violence. You got the women with these flip identities. The perfect wife, and then once her husband is gone, she flips over and becomes the angry, destroying goddess. That, from a Hindu perspective, is inside of every woman. This is of the goddess Durga. Her many arms, her violence, and notice the animal that is associated with this goddess, a lion, the fiercest animal, the most dangerous animal. Here she is on her lion fighting with that demon again. Everybody worships her to help destroy the demon, the animal demon that is inside of them. And her alter ego, the dark Kali. This is a goddess that is in every woman as well. And she wears either severed heads or skulls as a necklace. And she dances on Shiva, the male counterpart. The reason that he lies down there is to protect the universe from being destroyed by the angry goddess. I came across this image of Kali. You can see that she's actually being worshipped by people because you don't want to make her angry. You want to keep her from her dance of wrath. So this is the mother who can be terrifying, the goddess who protects you and cares for you, but if you anger her, she brings destruction to everybody. The best way to control the woman, the goddess, is to marry her off to a male who will control her. Once she's married to a male god, she's no longer so dangerous. Every woman has the goddess in her, and that goddess needs to be controlled by a man. So you need to marry.
People are literally afraid of the power that a woman will hold. if a woman were to become president, like, we'd all become castrated because we'd be subservient to her, is the most extreme view that I found.
And if Joan of Arc were a guy, a young peasant guy?
If it would have been a guy, it would have just been like he was a hero for this war, but you would have probably never heard of him.
It's a tale for men to say we're not always going to be the best and the biggest, and for women it's an empowerment of you also can be the biggest and the best.
I can't really imagine someone ripping their chest off.
We're used to the Western style of storytelling and it being the supposed history versus, I think, the more Eastern Indian tale.
If going from west to east, if there's kind of that knee-jerk reaction to say, oh, well, this is just kind of silly because, you know, no one's going to rip their boob off and set a town on fire.